Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something I know is on every business owner's mind, like pretty much constantly: growth. And more specifically, we're going to be getting into this whole debate around customer acquisition versus retention. You sent over some excerpts from Byron Sharp's How to Grow Your Customer Base. Love that title, by the way. Very straightforward. And yeah, he really kind of takes aim at some of those almost sacred marketing ideas that get thrown around, like, that whole retention is king thing. Get ready to rethink that one.
Seriously. What I find so interesting about Sharp's work is he's not saying retention doesn't matter. It's more like he's kind of flipping the script,
Yeah.
making you ask, is it really the most important thing when it comes to growth? Mom, he actually argues that for a lot of businesses, it's acquisition. So bringing in those new customers that might actually be the secret weapon they're overlooking.
Okay, see, now you've got me intrigued. So let's unpack this a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Sharp talks about something called the double jeopardy law. And I'll admit, it sounds a tad intimidating, haha. Could you break that down for us?
Yeah, no, it's not as complicated as it might sound at first. So basically the double jeopardy law, it says that bigger brands, they don't actually have more loyal customers just by default. Like as a percentage of their customer base. Think about it, like just a quick example. That little independent coffee shop down the street from you, they don't necessarily have a higher percentage of, die-hard regulars just because they're smaller than a Starbucks. What Sharp found is that how often customers jump ship, their defection rate, it's usually more related to the brand's market share, not like directly to how satisfied their customers actually are.
So are you saying those big brands, they might just seem more loyal because they've just got more customers to start with? Like, it's just a numbers game.
Exactly. And this is where Sharp, he kind of throws a wrench into all that traditional thinking about loyalty programs, right? There's this huge emphasis on showering your existing customers with rewards, discounts, you name it. And the idea is that'll make this massive difference in how many people stick around. But what this double jeopardy law is suggesting is that it's probably not that straightforward. Customer churn, it might be driven by stuff that has zero to do with how much you're like pampering your current customer base.
Which, I mean, that kind of brings us to that statistic you always hear, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's 5 times cheaper to keep an existing customer than to try to land a new one. It's everywhere you look.
Yeah.
But Sharp, he doesn't seem totally convinced.
Yeah, he really digs into the research behind that whole 5x cheaper idea. And his argument is it's mostly based on like a theoretical model, not so much on what's actually happening out there in the real world. In reality, to really slash your customer churn rate, you usually got to be doing something drastically different from your competition. And that rarely comes cheap or easy.
So if chasing after, like, cheaper retention, if that's not the magic solution, then what is? You mentioned acquisition earlier.
Right. So Sharp's research, what it indicates is that consistently bringing in new customers, that's absolutely vital for growth, even if you're already a well-established brand. And the example he uses, it's super interesting. He talks about car brands.
Okay, car brands. Now you've got my attention. Tell me more.
So in the book, he specifically looked at these car brands and their defection rates. Basically, how many car buyers switched to a different brand when they went to buy a new car. And he compared that to like the potential for gaining market share just by pulling in new customers. And what he found was actually kind of shocking. There are cases where the potential gains from acquisition, they were 50 times greater than what you could get just by stopping your existing customers from switching. He's got it all laid out in these tables, table 3.1 and 3.2 with all the hard numbers.
50 times. That's massive. Okay, I'm starting to see why he's so high on acquisition. But what about all those customers who do end up going with a different brand? Like, is that always a sign that we're doing something wrong?
That's a great question, and it actually leads into what I think is one of the most reassuring parts of Sharp's work. When he gets into the reasons why customers leave, it's not always because they're unhappy with your product or service or whatever you're selling.
Oh, thank goodness. Please tell me it's not just me.
No, not at all. So he talks about this Australian bank, Adelaide Bank, and they had a way higher churn rate than this other, much bigger bank, CBA. But here's the thing, Adelaide Bank, they were mainly a regional bank, right? So obviously when their customers moved to cities where Adelaide Bank didn't have any branches, they had to switch banks, even if they loved Adelaide's service. Whereas CBA, they had branches all over the country, so their customers were much less likely to be forced to switch just because they moved.
So in that case, it wasn't about better customer service or anything. It was totally out of the bank's control.
Exactly, and that is a key point. Sometimes customers jump ship because of life changes, what competitors are doing, all these external factors that, as a business, you just don't have a lot of power over.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
Right.
But I mean, that doesn't mean we should just like throw in the towel and forget all about customer satisfaction, right?
Sure.
Of course not. I mean, we still want happy customers, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it is kind of nice to know that we can't control every reason someone might leave. So where does that leave us? It feels like we've completely flipped the script on this whole acquisition versus retention debate.
Yeah, in a way we have. Look, Sharp isn't saying retention doesn't matter at all, but he is kind of pushing us to rethink like where it fits in the bigger picture of our growth strategy. It's not about picking one over the other. It's more about finding that sweet spot, the right balance between the two.
Okay, so how do we find that balance? Like, how do we figure out the right mix for, for our specific business?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no like magic formula here. The ideal balance, it really depends on your industry, your target market, who your current customers are, and what your goals are for your business overall. But what Sharp's work does give us is a framework, like a starting point for making these decisions.
All right, well, let's hear it. Give us the framework.
Okay, so first and foremost, you really got to understand your current customer base, right?
Sure.
And your defection rate. How many customers are you losing each year? And more importantly, why are they leaving? Once you have a good grasp on that, then you can start looking at, okay, what's the potential for growth if we focus on acquisition? Remember those car brands we were talking about?
Oh, yeah. 50 times greater potential, wasn't it?
Exactly. Now imagine that same scenario, but in your industry. How many potential customers are out there who aren't doing business with you right now? And how many of them are switching brands every year? If there's a lot of movement in your market, then focusing on acquisition, that could be a huge opportunity.
It's like suddenly you're seeing this whole untapped pool of potential customers you didn't even realize was there.
That's exactly it. It's all about shifting your perspective.
Yeah.
Acquisition lets you tap into that bigger pool, and that can really accelerate your growth. Think of it this way. If your market, if it just naturally has a high defection rate, meaning people are switching brands all the time anyway, focusing on acquisition, it's almost like shooting fish in a barrel.
Okay, I'm getting on board with the whole acquisition thing, but I'm not going to lie, I'm also a little overwhelmed. It's a pretty big shift in thinking.
I hear you. Look, it's not about ditching everything you're doing on the retention side. It's more about approaching growth from a fresh perspective, and understanding all the different things you can tweak and adjust to get where you want to be.
So for our listeners who are, ready to maybe ditch that retention is king crowd and explore this whole acquisition thing, where do they even start? What's the biggest takeaway from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Acquisition, it deserves a place at the table. Don't get so caught up in keeping the customers you already have that you forget about constantly trying to bring new ones in.
So in a way, having a bigger customer base actually makes those retention efforts even more impactful. Right?
Exactly. Even if your defection rate stays exactly the same, if you've got a bigger customer base to start with, well, now you've got a bigger pool of potential repeat customers. It's a win-win.
This has been, wow, a real eye-opener for me. I'm realizing how easy it is to get stuck in that mindset of like just trying to please the customers we've already got. Sharp really makes you think bigger.
And that's what's so great about his work. He's not saying customer satisfaction or retention don't matter. He's just saying, hey, there are lots of different ways to grow, and sometimes those less obvious ones, like acquisition, they're the ones with the most potential.
You know what? I think I need to go back and reread those excerpts with a whole new perspective.
Thanks for joining me on this little journey through the mind of Byron Sharp. I always learn so much from these conversations.
It's my pleasure. Always great to chat about this stuff with someone who's as passionate about growth as you are.
And for our listeners, if this deep dive has, piqued your interest and you're eager to dive even deeper into Sharp's work, don't worry, we got you. We'll be sure to include a link to his book in the show notes. Because as we've learned today, sometimes you got to challenge those old assumptions to unlock some serious growth.
Couldn't agree more. Never underestimate the power of a fresh perspective.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny, those aha moments often come when you least expect them.
Right. You just need that little push to see things differently. And that's what Sharp does so well.
Absolutely. He really makes you stop and question, like, why am I even doing things this way?
It's so easy to just get caught in that marketing echo chamber and just accept things as gospel. For sure. Well, listen, this has been such a great deep dive. I always learned so much from chatting with you.
Likewise. Always a pleasure to geek out about this stuff.
For our listeners, if this deep dive has, got those marketing gears turning and you're ready to really dig into Sharp's book, Don't worry, we've got you covered. We'll put a link to it right there in the show notes because, hey, if there's one thing we've learned today, it's that sometimes those biggest growth opportunities, they come from challenging those old assumptions we didn't even realize we were making.
100%. Never hurts to shake things up a bit.
That's it for this deep dive, everyone. Catch you next time for another deep dive into the ideas shaping the business world and beyond. Until then, keep those minds open and those customers rolling in.